So glad to have you join us. Now we begin with latest updates on Saturday's FCT Area Council's election in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Our correspondents have been on the field all day, combing every nook and cranny of the 6 area councils of Nigeria's Federal Capital Territory. That's Amak, Kuje, Buhari, Kwali, Abaji, and Gwagwalada area councils. Now we'll be linking up with them for more updates on the council polls meant to elect chairmen and councillors as collation begins amid reports of poor voter turnout around the nation's capital. Meanwhile, the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory, Nyesom Wike, on Saturday toured several polling units across Abuja to monitor the conduct of the area council elections, beginning from Lagos Crescent in the Garki 2 districts of Abuja and extending to Karu, Karshi, and Keti districts, among other communities. Let's listen to him.
If you had my statement, I said, with the approval of Mr. President, I said, from 8 p.m. to 6 p.m. today, that people are doing the Will Sit movement. And this is not the first time. And you can see that they don't take patience to read it. I know she reads love magazines and all those things, but I don't have a chance time to read on that educative material. Like when you see somebody's speech, why not take time and get his speech and understand what was said?
As FCT Minister Nyesom Wike talking about the controversial curfew period that was put in place in the nation's capital, Abuja, and then, of course, the holiday that was declared on Friday, which has got a whole lot of citizens, saying that they were unhappy about it, and it's a precedence that has never been set before. Well, joining us now is Arise News Chief Correspondent Ferdinand Duruoha, who has been covering the elections for Arise News since the polls opened earlier in the morning. Thank you so much, Ferdinand. Talk to us exactly where you are at the moment and what is going on right there.
All right, thank you so much, Samna. Well, quite an interesting day. Well, it's been a long one. When I say long one, I mean trying to follow up with activities, even from the point where, INEC began the distribution, and of course, up until this point. Right now, we are in Gwagwalada, and to be very precise, we are in Kutumku 1, and it is where the collation is indeed happening for, the polling booths around this area. Well, I must say, it's been quite peaceful. However, well, you did mention quite earlier on in your introduction there that without a doubt, we did see plenty of voter apathy. Now, you take a look at at what we've seen, during the hours of voting, and of course, you take a look at the forms right now. Well, you will see that in most of the areas, well, less than 10% of the registered voters did come out. Now, we are talking about accreditations of 73, when in some polling booths, when we had registered members of about 800, and then in some places where we had registered members of about 500, and we had just 40-something. And then even in one polling booth, where we had barely 20 persons coming out to, of course, cast their vote. And it tells us that FCT indeed is not immune to some of these challenges that we've seen in some other places. We're still talking about challenges. Well, I want to say Beavers did record a good outing, and that's because we did see the Beavers being used. But just by my side, you see some of the agents are coming in from some of the centers there, and of course coming in with some of the materials. But then going back to Beavers, well, we did see that yes, the Beavers did perform quite well. Where we're talking about the average accreditation time of about 2 minutes per voter, which is fairly okay, when you compare it to what we've seen in some other elections, where it takes as much as 4 to 5 to even 6 minutes, or sometimes you try, and then you find out that it just didn't work. Well, although there are pockets of situations where it didn't also work as well. So still looking at some of the situations options that possibly INEC could have to take a look at. Well, I also saw one or two places where voting started at about 9:30 or past 9, as compared to most of the other places where it started at about 8:30, 8:45. So we can say most times, in most areas, we saw voting start about 8:30, 8:45. So all in all, interesting, peaceful, but of course not immune from some of the traditional challenges we've seen plaguing Nigeria's elections.
All right, a very interesting perspective. I would like to let our viewers know that the distance between Gwagwalada, where you are right now, from the Abuja city center is 57.3 kilometers. And so that's why you are, that's where you are there for us at the moment. Now, talk to us about how you've seen the behavior of election officials and then the security services, and if there have been any instances of maybe voter intimidation or suppression, like some of the opposition leaders had said, or if everything just went pretty smoothly.
Well, let's begin with the security situation. I think, we did see a good number of our security operatives at man-pulling units. Well, in most of the pulling, booths, we had about an average of 5 to 6, and it's quite a good mix. Well, we talk about policemen, we talk about civil defense, and in Gwagwalada here, where we monitored Kuje, I monitored Kuje and Gwagwalada, and in both of them, we did see a good number of immigration officers. Well, don't forget, the immigration quarters is not too far here in Gwagwalada, and then in Kuje also, we did see correctional officers also participate. So, well, a good security presence, and perhaps that accounts for some of the reasons why we didn't get to see pronounced violence. However, if there's one phenomenon that we've condemned strongly, and we've talked about the reason to clamp down heavily on, it is the issue of voter buying. Try as hard as we can. Well, we did see the security, we did see the presence of particularly the EFCC, who have the mandate of clamping down on persons trying to be very funny as regards election vote buying. However, somehow stylishly, party agents, and then also even candidates still find a way of doing these things, and trying to, sometimes they try to give it to one or two persons who hide it within their dresses. Well, in some places, you just see people giving signs. In some places, you see people just come out and then say, well, I've gotten mine, and then when you ask around, you hear that it's still within the figures of 2,000 to 3,000 to 4,000, and for some of them, they say, well, it's just something to say thank you for coming out. But one way or the other, we know these monies have a way of influencing voters, and that's exactly the reason why we must try very, very hard to definitely clamp down on it.
All right, thank you so much, Arise Chief of Correspondence, Ferdinand Duruoha, right there for us at Kutunku in Gwagwalada Area Council of the Federal Capital Territory, and that's about 57.3 kilometers away from the Abuja city center.